Welcome to Kitchen Table Conversations, a series of short and shareable conversation starters for those of us who have or love and support people with a complicated and beautiful brain. Here's your host, Angela Geddes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Kitchen Table Conversations. I am your host, Angela, and once again, so just grateful that you've chosen to take some of your very busy time and spend it with us. The purpose of these kitchen table conversations, once again, is just to provide some short tidbits of very important information in our efforts to build a more inclusive service delivery system and a more inclusive communities, and for people to feel better understood and less stigmatized with regards to some complicated mental health and learning difficulties that many of us experience. So today's topic is going to focus on neurodiversity and the importance of proper assessment, and again, our goal of creating more inclusive communities. So we'll start first with neurodiversity, which is a welcomed term, in my opinion, used to describe the general understanding that brains are very different, and even within specific conditions. So autism spectrum disorder, for example, no two brains are the same, so it is a spectrum of disorders. The definition of neurodiversity or neurodivergent conditions and what qualifies varies. And a lot of what you see when you Google it, which is ironic because it was the title of a very recent podcast that we just finished. But when you Google it, usually neurodiversity and neurodivergent conditions include autism spectrum disorder. In fact, I believe that's where the term originated, and it's become more and more commonly used to describe a range of disorders, which now include things like ADHD. Sometimes they include anxiety and trauma-related conditions, dyslexia, developmental language disorder, for example. What becomes difficult, however, is that as soon as you start including certain conditions that may qualify as something that's neurodivergent, there's a risk of excluding others. If anxiety is included, for example, why not depression? And when searching online, I have found what's included to be quite different. Most of you who know who I am know that I'm particularly passionate about one of the most hidden conditions, which is fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And so most of the time when I'm out on my social media and doing some research there, I see different resources and articles written around neurodiversity. I've even attended a couple of groups with neurodivergent affirming therapists, and unfortunately none of whom understood or even felt that FASD should be included under neurodiverse conditions, which is so disheartening to me. However, unfortunately, not that surprising. But when you look at some of the symptoms of neurodivergent conditions, they include things like depression and fatigue and anxiety and the tendency to ruminate and working memory and inconsistent memory difficulties and burnout. And then when you look at some of the strengths, conversely, you're looking at people who are really, really empathetic, people who are really creative and artistic and persistent and tenacious, and sometimes they can be really imaginative and analytical and energetic. And they can be problem solvers and express significant resilience. So all of these, both strengths and areas of challenges, can be found with people who have FASD as well and traumatic brain injury. But I'm here to say that typically FASD is not included, and so we've got some work to do. But I'm proud to say that on my LinkedIn account, for example, I've been seeing some of these articles around neurodiversity. I've been hashtagging FASD, and actually I see a revised graphic that I won't name any names, but a revised graphic that now includes, in the far right corner, mind you, FASD and TBI. Not with a lot of descriptors or anything else, but we're making some progress. And that's the point of these kitchen table conversations, because we do want to build a more inclusive service delivery system. We want to build more inclusive communities where people don't feel judged and don't feel that they don't belong. And it doesn't really matter to me other than in terms of prevention. With prevention, we need to talk about the role of certain toxins, which include alcohol and various drugs and certain foods and different things that we should be avoiding during pregnancy. That helps us to prevent. But once the condition is here, who cares whether it's sour milk, vodka, or tomato soup that caused the problem? The bottom line is we all have to identify when there is a problem and when it is beyond a mental health condition and when it's beyond behavioral and when it's beyond possibly our unfair biased opinion that it's poor parenting and poor decision making. So we all have a role to play in, again, making sure that people feel like they belong, and that begins with our service delivery system being better able to screen and identify and to be able to provide proper assessments so that we can really take a look at neurodiverse brains and recognize where the areas of strengths are and where the complicated areas of deficits may be, so that we can surround individuals with the relevant and helpful supports and services that are so badly needed. October is Occupational Therapy Month here in Canada, and I thought that I would just take a moment to acknowledge what an integral role occupational therapists play in many of our very complicated mental health and developmental assessments. In the spirit of this podcast, where we're focusing on neurodivergent conditions, I just think that it would be really important to help people understand that occupational therapists can really help us to understand what's really going on behind some of the behaviors that we're seeing. So, sensory processing issues and like the sensitivity to touch, and we all know kids that get a little bit upset with when their socks are crooked or when there's too many seams in clothes or tags that are going on. But sometimes this is a really serious concern for people, and they spend a great deal of their time being very, very uncomfortable. Occupational therapists can seek and assess and determine whether or not there's light sensitivities or sound sensitivities. They can help us understand what's behind pencil grip difficulties, or maybe there's slight difficulties with balance or coordination. And things like that can be sometimes very subtle in presentation, but can be very complex for the individual who's experiencing them. So again, occupational therapists are so important, and I would encourage anyone who's questioning whether or not their kids are struggling with any of their developmental stages to seek out and look for further assessment in this area, because their findings can be very enlightening and they can provide the tools and the strategies and the supports that can really make life easier for individuals within their environment and make really creative and important accommodations in order to better position people for improved outcomes. To learn more about neurodiversity and these complicated mental health and developmental presentations that we're speaking of, there still are some spaces available, I'm understanding, at the 3rd Annual London and Region FASD Conference, where the focus is in fact on neurodiversity and discovering and rediscovering the implications of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So this conference is going to be bridging together research, clinical, and lived experience. This conference is taking place virtually on October the 26th, so feel free to Google the London and Region FASD Conference for more details. Hope to see you there. So once again, thanks so much for tuning in, and please feel free to share this as a conversation starter or to keep conversations going within your circle. With many thanks, Angela.